What's up, guys? So Jared Ball, why is Jared Ball making excuses for liberal Zionist Martin Luther King? Why is Jared Ball trying to let literal Zionist squatters off the hook? Let's take a listen. And again, I first heard concerns about Jared Ball from my buddy Ramiro Sebastian Funes when I did the podcast called Unmasking Imperialism with him, right? Back last year, literally almost exactly a year ago. We exposed Morton Klein. We exposed Norman Finkelstein. Alinejad or whatever the fuck, the U.S. Iranian puppet funded by the CIA, that one, we exposed her. But there was also comments about JAB. Now, this is who JAB is. This egghead motherfucker right here. Sorry, he's bald. What else am I supposed to call him? But interestingly enough, as you can see, his dad was black. His dad was a Black Panther, but his mom was a Russian Ashkenazi Jew, and his maternal grandparents or great-grandparents were Zionist squatters in Palestine. So it's interesting, and it's kind of suspicious. Actually, it's hella suspicious that he's letting Zionist squatters off the hook in this comment that he made with Davey D, and he's trying to make excuses for Martin Luther Cuck. By the way, I call Martin Luther King Martin Luther Cuck because he was a Zionist cuck. As we'll see, we'll go over an article by Jonathan Azazia from Mokoama Music. But yeah.
Say anything specific to King, I just want to remind everybody, or maybe inform or let folks know that right now, the pro-Israel community, the Zionist community, and as it's been reported in the last couple of days, coming from their own mouthpieces, their own outlets, Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL in particular, they have a real PR problem. Greenblatt can be heard in a recent discussion with some constituents telling them that unlike any time in the past, the issue that they have is that generationally, not left or right, but generationally, young Jews, young Israelis, young even generally liberal people, he said, do not support what Israel is doing.
Did you hear him try to run cover for Zionist squatters there? He said, young Jews, a'udhu billah, young Israelis, a'udhu billah, right? Astaghfirullah, right? He literally ran cover for Zionist squatters. You think it's maybe because his maternal grandparents or great-grandparents were Zionist squatters in Palestine? Let's go over here, see what he has to say here.
Only to the historical Jesus Christ. And
so now he's comparing Martin Luther Cuck, who was a Zionist cuck, to Isa alayhi salam. Astaghfirullah, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Literally comparing the guy who Surat al-Imran in the Quran is written about to Martin Luther Cuck, who was a Zionist cuck and a Protestant extremist.
As a result, he is referenced as much as anyone and with as little understanding or context as anyone. So it just so happens that because, shout out to Geechee and the Barter and Build Collective, where I'm studying with them, a book titled Black Power in Palestine, Transnational Countries of Color, in which the author Michael Fischbach.
Notice that it's written by a guy with the last name Fischbach. It ain't written by a Palestinian. It probably ain't even written by a black guy. Notice Fischbach. Isn't that sus?
Has a chapter on Dr. King. Chapter 4, in fact. So I thought we'd take a few minutes, have a look at the chapter, see what context it adds, and take advantage of this moment to remind folks that, again, King is far more radical he's given credit for. Please check the many other programs we've done on that issue. Or as we often want to tell people when it comes to Dr. King, please don't read, beloved. All right, so let's get it.
And then he uses a clip of Hiram Rivera. Really, bruh? Hiram Rivera is way more left-wing than you, Jared Ball. Hiram Rivera outflanks you to the left, bruh.
All right, so here's the chapter in question, chapter 4, balanced and guarded Martin Luther King Jr. on the Arab-Israeli tightrope. And where they start off...
So notice how it says tightrope. Because he was trying to play both sides like fucking Cornel West.
Where the author starts off with this is to talk about how King grappled, at least in his own mind, to the extent he didn't do it publicly, and in his inner circles, with the occupation of Palestine and having to juxtapose a need to remain nonviolent in his philosophy and approach, to defend Jews and Israel, and particularly Jews supporting his efforts in the civil rights struggle, and also to balance the emerging radicalism in the black community, the Black Power movement, and his own consciousness.
So, in other words, he was a Zionist cuck.
Despite what Amy Schumer and many others have wanted to try to do with Dr. King, it's way more complicated than, of course, they would be wanting to give credit.
It's not complicated, you dumbass. It's not motherfucking complicated. Are you stupid, Jared? Are you stupid? This is why Ramiro raised some red flags about Jared Ball. Again, Jared Ball is not a revolutionary. He's an academic.
Or want to acknowledge, certainly.
And his maternal lineage is a bunch of Russian Jews who are Zionist squatters in Palestine.
Not wanting to concern themselves with the complexities of black people's history and thought. But as he's quoted here, saying that there were dark days before, but this is the darkest. And of course, what Dr. King was talking about was the 1967 Arab-Israeli war, or conflict, or invasion. So a lot of this chapter focuses on King's struggle with whether he should go for another visit, because in 1959 or 1957, I'll check that in a second, he had actually gone to the West Bank as part of a trip. And I think it's the first time that I'll come back to it in the article, but one of the few times, not the first time, someone of his stature in civil rights made such a visit to the West Bank. But that, as he noted here, he said, but when it came to going again, as he had been planning to before the breakout of that 1967 war, he said that he didn't think he could make that visit and not come out unscathed. Because as this article points out, and as many might want to particularly the reverse hashtag community that wants to make use of King in reference to some vacuous call for getting a reparations check. The reality is that King was an internationalist, and it is correct here, for the most part, as Fishbach writes, that King did not simply champion the struggle of American blacks. He also spoke out against war, poverty, and injustice more generally. In particular, he watched events in Africa, Asia, and Latin America as anti-colonial struggles broke out left and right in the 1950s and 60s. He called for a boycott of the racist regime in South Africa, and in December of 1957, he gave a speech in which he acknowledged the interconnectedness of global struggles for independence, with that being waged by blacks in America. Quote, the determination of Negro Americans to win freedom from all forms of oppression springs from the same deep longing that motivates oppressed peoples all over the world. The rumblings of discontent in Asia and Africa are expressions of a quest for freedom and human dignity by people who have long been the victims of colonialism and imperialism, end quote. So again, when people start to project what King would be saying about this conflict or other conflicts, he was clearly laying out a political trajectory well before he was assassinated, and in fact, some would argue.
But what is his record, bro? What is his record? He was laying out a political trajectory, but what was his record up to that point? Jonathan Azaziah has that well documented. So he talks about, so this article, brilliant article, by the way, shout out to brother Jonathan Azaziah, also known as Mad Cold, great rapper, great journalist. It says the Martin Luther King paradox. From Jewish Zionist puppet and Uncle Tom to pro-Palestine anti-imperialist murdered by U.S. Zionist agents. Reverend Martin Luther King, Martin Luther Cuck, was a Zionist puppet. Don't mean to burst your bubble, nor piss in your parade, nor puke at your party, nor pour motor oil in your cereal. It's just facts, Jack. Martin Luther King, aka Martin Luther Cuck, was a Jewish Zionist puppet. Born Michael King Jr. to Michael King Sr., a Christian Zionist who changed their names to Martin Luther following his interaction with the Baptist World Alliance, which was known for its strong stance against quote-unquote anti-Semitism. He was raised up on Schofieldist poison. So, a gifted and powerful speaker, MLKJ wasn't anywhere nearly proficient in scholarship, and his repeated offenses of plagiarism, well documented even by the Zionist media outlets that worship him, including the New York Times. This would make his doctor title null and void. His oratory skills caught the eyes of some mighty influential folks, and due to this, coupled with his ambitions, his transgressions were overlooked and doctorate was upheld. Now, who are these mighty influential folks, you ask? Well, I'll tell you, the American Jewish Congress and its kingpin, Stanley David Levinson. Not a small fish by any means. Levinson was a communist par excellence, raising so much dough for the Communist Party, the FBI placed him under surveillance. He was involved with defending the Rosenbergs and the predominantly Jewish Soviet spying they were a part of. Levinson would become disillusioned with communism and focus more on liberal causes through the American Jewish Congress, which was bankrolling MLK and his organizations lock, stock, and smoking barrel. It's imperative to mention that the feds began spying and abusing King because of his ties to Levinson in the first place. The New York Jewish lawyer would become King's friend, advisor, and all-around handler, and even ghostwriter. Among the pieces Levinson wrote for the Reverend, the most famous of all, I Have a Dream. So when you listen to that pile of kumbaya-laced drivel, know that you're not listening to the words of an anti-racist icon, but the legerdemain of a communist-turned-Zionist Jew using a black preacher to further the aims of his tribe. During the Uncle Tom stage of his life, MLKJ could barely breathe without Levinson's approval, and this led to all types of recognition. The NAACP, founded with the Judaic money of Henry Moskowitz, is related maybe to Todd Moskowitz, the associate of Leor Cohen there. Potentially, right? We have to consider that as a possibility, right? As the counterweight to black nationalist revolutionary hero Marcus Garvey gave King its Spingarn Award. Or Spingarn Award. I don't know how the fuck you say it. A particularly perverse ceremony, considering that Joel Elias Spingarn was one of several Jews responsible for the undermining, unraveling, and imprisonment of Garvey, not to mention the burying of the militancy he preached. The American Jewish Committee, another Zionist institution, gave King its American Liberties Medallion. And another shining example of hypocritical perversity, the Planned Parenthood Federation of America handed over the Margaret Sanger Award to MLKJ. The award's namesake was married to the Ashkenazi subversive William Sanger, associated with Jewish anarchist terrorist Emma Goldman, and trained in abortion activist by Minsk Jewish Fania Esaya Mindel. Moreover, she was an anti-black eugenicist that strove for the establishment of birth control clinics nationwide to control the birth rate of black communities. King accepted this award, the others mentioned, and a great deal more than that without flinching or reflecting on what they really meant, what their origins were, who was exactly handing them out. Perhaps more disturbing than Levinson was the Torah-loving, Kabbalistic, Hasidic, Talmudic Jewish theologian, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who MLKJ called my rabbi. Beyond being a zealous Zionist who declared the genocidal Zionist entity to be the stream of dreaming, the sacred river flowing in the Jewish souls of ages, Heschel was the driving force behind the Catholic purging of what he deemed anti-Jewish creeds in the New Testament, or, as everyone else in the world will call the truths. As the rep for American Jews at the Second Ecumenical Council of the Vatican, he worked night and day in the shadows and in front of the cameras, lobbying, bullying, and blackmailing not one pontiff but two, Pope John and Pope Paul, to fundamentally and inexplicably change Christianity by absolving the Jews of any wrongdoing vis-a-vis Jesus, alayhi salam. The Nostra Aetate would render Jewry innocent of decide and accursedness, as well as condemning anti-Semitism in a full-throated manner, completely disregarding Isa al-Masih alayhi salam's own words about the Jews and their relationship with Shaitan. In simple terms, Heschel completed the Judaization of the Catholic Church. How any lover of Christ, let alone a preacher of his word, could get near such a destructive individual, let alone be friends with him, let alone to refer to him as my rabbi? Eclipses any and all forms of comprehension. Unbeknownst to most, a major influence on MLKJ's life was Martin Buber, the cultural Zionist figure who longed for his more secular Zionist counterparts to adopt Hasidism, to push for creating a Jewish state. Between this, the Schofieldism in his youth, close ties with Rabbi Jacob M. Rothschild, the never-ending whispering in his ears by Stanley Levitson, and later the deep and disturbing relationship with the fanatical Rabbi Heschel, it shouldn't come as a surprise that he was a total supporter of the usurping Zionist entity. The world must see, MLKJ once declared, the Zionist entity must... So he said this bullshit right here. Can you believe that, MLK said? I'm not surprised because he's a Zionist cuck, right? More infamous than that was his rebuke of anyone, especially African Americans who decried Zionism. When people criticize Zionists, they mean Jews. You're talking anti-Semitism. MLK literally said that. Not even a golem constructed by his buddy Heschel that looked just like him and named MLKJ would make for a more subservient Shabbos goy or Uncle Tom or kosher Gentile than he was. MLKJ was world Zionism's tool to carve out a black community that would be compliant with his aims. Vera Lee, the late great Jewish dissident, Shahak, hypothesized in Jewish history, Jewish religion, the weight of 3,000 years, that many, many rabbis and other Jewish figures who supported MLK were doing so for tactical reasons of injecting Zionism into the black community. They also hid the hideously anti-black traditions of both Judaism and Jewish culture from MLK, making them, at the absolute minimum, gross and gargantuan hypocrites. That's MLK's record. So obviously he met Malcolm X, Rahimahullah, and something shifted. Through a chance encounter, or, for the believers reading, an encounter undoubtedly designed and gifted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, MLKJ met Malcolm X, Rahimahullah, and their brief exchange has such a profound impact on his spiritual, political, social worldview that he knew he could never go back to the way things were. Moreover, we now know that they were much closer than previously thought, and it wasn't only Malcolm X, Rahimahullah, anti-imperialism that MLKJ was adopting, but also his black nationalism too. MLKJ would ultimately have spent enough time around Malcolm X that he would have gotten to know and revert to Islam because of Malcolm X, Rahimahullah. MLKJ came out strongly against the American regime's aggression against the Vietnamese people, and thus the former can and should be credited as the inspiration behind the latter's actual greatest speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence, also known as the Riverside Church speech, which was delivered a year to the very day MLK was killed, a proof that we assure you isn't coincidence, but most certainly a get it like the last name Cohen, coincidence. And there's one more thing. MLKJ was moved by Malcolm X, Rahimahullah, about the Zionist occupation of Palestine. Yes, after being a Christian Zionist for just about his whole life, MLKJ was realizing that he couldn't be a critic of American policy in Vietnam, especially, but then maintain his support for the murderous Jewish supremacist endeavor in Palestine. Much to the chagrin of his handlers, this fire was burning in him stronger and stronger with each passing day. Levinson and Harry Wachtel, MLKJ's other Jewish lawyer who managed his estate after his assassination, and was also a founding member of the shady Jewish-run law firm Rubin, Wachtel, and Baum, and Levin that defended a plethora of Jewish financial criminals, urged him not to walk back his support for the hateful, fake Zionist regime. But King canceled the trip to occupy Palestine and spoke about Jewish subjugation of black people in the ghettos of New York 9 days before he was killed. That's something Jared Ball doesn't want to tell you. Had he not gone militant quite yet, but he was fast approaching that sort of mindset. It was for this reason, undoubtedly, that Henry Schwarzschild, the public operations director from the ADL from 1962 to 1964, called MLKJ a loose cannon and an unguided missile that nobody could be quite sure of what he was going to do next. So MLK was a liberal Zionist most of his life. There we have the receipts. So what else does Jared Ball say?
argue, probably myself included, that this is in part what led to that assassination. Contrary to what generally is written about King, he was not a knee-jerk supporter of Israel to the detriment of Palestinians and other Arabs.
Actually, he kind of was, until he met Malcolm X Rahimahullah, as Jonathan Azaziah pointed out. Jonathan Azaziah, literally, I just read his article, right? I just read it to you. Until Martin Luther Cuck met Malcolm X Rahimahullah, he was a liberal Zionist cuck.
So, of course, King, being a preacher, being steeped in sort of that tradition and mythology, like many, he saw connections between his ministry and the plight and suffering of the ancient Hebrews, and I would argue mistakenly applied that mythology to an understanding of literal history, and then misapplied that misunderstanding to the literal history of today's European descended Jews and Israelis. But the point...
So what does that tell us about Protestantism? What does that tell us about the Protestants? Protestantism is derived from occultism, Freemasonry, Kabbalah, and Zionism.
This is one of the pulls on King. These traditions, these mythologies. Then there's the political pull of needing support from American Jews for the civil rights movement.
So Protestants are, in essence, Zionist cucks.
Or feeling that he needed the support, which is, of course, an ongoing major contradiction. And then...
Because he's a dumbass, because MLK was a dumbass and a Zionist cuck.
The other pole of black militancy and radicalism. So as I said, the book talks about, this chapter talks about King making a trip to the West Bank in 1959, feeling it necessary, even as part of his again, nonviolent ministry. And it marked the first time that a major figure in the black freedom struggle actually visited the Palestinians' homeland. So again, whatever people might want to say, trying to ascribe their politics to King.
MLK was a Zionist cuck. Protestants are Zionist cucks. Actually, let's scroll back a couple seconds to see what Jared highlighted here. See? A Protestant Christian clergyman. King was also intimately familiar with the Bible and his stories about how God gave the ancient Hebrews, fake Hebrews, really, the promised land in ancient Canaan. It was a standard feature of black Protestant Christianity to relate black suffering to that of the ancient Hebrews. Thus, the modern Zionist saga of the JOOs returning to the promised land was well known to King. In fact, the night before he was murdered, King eerily compared himself to Moses, whom God did not allow to enter the promised land with the Hebrews according to the biblical account, when he said to a gathering of black admirers in Memphis, Tennessee, one of the biggest, most Protestant Zio-cucked places in the U.S., I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. What a fucking Zionist cuck. This is what Protestantism is: Zionism, Kabbalah, occultism, and Freemasonry combined.
This is one of the...
Let's get back to where we were.
To live in their homes. So as I said, the book talks about, this chapter talks about King making a trip to the West Bank in 1959.
By the way, my 47th grandpa was from Al-Khalil, Palestine. So I am actually part Palestinian.
Feeling it necessary, even as part of his again, nonviolent ministry. And it marked the first time that a major figure in the black freedom struggle actually visited the Palestinians' homeland. So again, whatever people might want to say, trying to ascribe their politics to King, he felt it necessary to meet with and show solidarity with Palestinians. The chapter goes...
So that schmuck, King then, so Kalbian called in a prescription to a local pharmacy. Before he could leave, however, King then told him, "Sir, sit down, we'd like to talk." King confessed to the doctor that he'd never heard the Arab point of view about the genocide of Palestine and wanted to hear about it. King is a dumbass. Martin Luther Cuck was a Zionist cuck. Kalbian told him about the situation. Thus, the noted American civil rights leader heard about the plight of the Palestinians directly from someone whose own boyhood home was one of thousands left behind by the fleeing refugees 11 years earlier. Kalbian also told King that he really should meet and talk to some Palestinian officials while in Al-Quds, and that he would arrange it. After he left, Kalbian informed the owner of the YMCA, Labib Nasser, about the famous guest staying at the hostel. "Why didn't someone tell me he was there?" replied the startled Kalbian. And Nasser decided to invite some prominent Palestinians to a dinner that was held at the National Restaurant.
Goes into a discussion of him meeting with Palestinians and displaced Palestinian people and what impact this had.
Attendees included Ruhi Al-Khatib, the mayor of Al-Quds, Musa Nasser, an academic, Anton Atollah, a judge, Raja Al-Issa, a journalist, Anwar Nusebeh, a politician and statesman. Kalbian himself could not make the dinner, but King apparently enjoyed it, for he later thanked him for arranging it.
On him. Having dinner with displaced people, no longer able to live in their homes. And when he came back, the chapter talks about the impact of the trip on his subsequent sermons. A walk through the Holy Land. He may have been including the Middle East when he spoke these words about the third world and struggles of its people. Words that were also relevant to the Black Americans sitting in the pews before him. I think we know today there is a struggle, a desperate struggle going on in this world. 2/3 of the people of the world are colored people. They have been dominated politically, exploited economically, trampled over and humiliated. There is a struggle on the part of these people to gain freedom and human dignity. So again, it's truly disrespectful.
So, MLK, despite all this, was largely still a Zionist cuck.
Even to the extent that some of these arguments are correct, to reduce King and others to a platitude here or there that is politically convenient, when so much of the context is left out and an appreciation for the people in the study, in the history of the people being discussed, in this case Black people or Palestinians, is largely irrelevant. In October of 1964, for example, he received a letter from an American living in Israel who brought to his attention Israel's discriminatory policies towards Palestinian minority. This American Jew made the comparison himself between Israel and South Africa, trying to help King better understand. And in fact, if you read this article for yourself, of course, I would, not article, the chapter of this book yourself,
Notice how Jared Ball doesn't condemn the Zionist squatter for staying there.
American Jew living in Israel spoke similarly to the experience that was passed down to me about my own mother's people, that they had been invited to this sort of socialist kibbutzim style in Israel, and then they realized that Zionism was a colonial project displacing and oppressing Palestinians, and they weren't down for it. My mother's folks ended up leaving well before Israel was created. This particular American Jew stayed, but still noted what was happening and wanted King to be aware of it. And then
so notice how he doesn't call the American Jew a Zionist squatter, and notice how he notes that his own maternal grandparents, he said his mom's folks. So his own maternal grandparents were Zionist squatters. And he makes excuses for them. He makes excuses for them living on a kibbutz. Notice that?
Experience that was passed down to me about my own mother's people, that they had been invited to this sort of socialist kibbutzim style in Israel, and then they realized that Zionism was a colonial project displacing and oppressing Palestinians, and they weren't down for it. My mother's folks ended up leaving well before Israel was created.
That doesn't absolve them of genocide or war crimes, bro. That does not absolve your maternal grandparents of genocide and war crimes. So what if they went there before the Nakba happened? and they left before the Nakba happened. They're still guilty of war crimes and genocide against my people.
A particular American Jew stayed, but still noted what was happening and wanted King to be aware of it. And then
and notice how he doesn't condemn Richard Kresh, the American Jew that wrote to Martin Luther Cuck. Notice that he doesn't condemn him. Right? So King, again, liberal Zionist cuck, Martin Luther Cuck. So Abraham Harmon, again, Harmon is such a sus last name. Literally everyone I know with that last name is sus, right? The Zionist ambassador to the U.S., Abraham Harmon, invited King to normalize the Zionist entity. King did not accept these invitations, but about the same time he began developing his own plans to travel to West Asia on his own. He started planning a huge pilgrimage of American Christians who would travel both to the 48 lands and normalize the Zionist entity, and the West Bank in late 1967. King must have been affected deeply enough by his own pilgrimage to the Holy Land that he wanted to return in the company of others, although on his own terms, not as an honored guest of Zionist squatters and Jewish groups. But when you're normalizing the 48 lands, you're normalizing genocide. You dumbass, Martin Luther Cuck. Martin Luther Cuck should have known that by going to the 48 lands, he's normalizing genocide. Again, Michael Fishback is a Zionist cuck. Michael Fishback is a Zionist gatekeeper. Jared Ball, well, his maternal grandparents are Zionist gatekeepers. My maternal grandpa was part Palestinian, right? And I got receipts, homie. Come on. Oh. Speculative results. Well, it indicates that I'm 15% Palestinian. I am 15.47% Palestinian. Genome Link says I'm 15.54 Palestinian. So I have somewhere in the ballpark of 15% Palestinian ancestry via Musa ibn Nusayr, the Umayyad general from Al-Khalil, Palestine, who brought Islam to Spain. Again, I'm way more revolutionary than Jared Ball.
I'm not going to do too much with this. The chapter goes into the backs and forth that King had about trying to determine whether or not he would go visit the Middle East again. He ultimately does not go because he does not want to be seen as being supportive of the oppression of Palestinians by Israelis, while he's also trying to connect the struggle of black people to anti-colonial movements around the world. But he also doesn't want to be too explicit about this because he doesn't want to upset the support of American Jews whose support was often sought by King and the mainstream civil rights activist community. So ultimately, King does cancel all of those subsequent trips and is assassinated before he can ever go back. One point that Schumer and many others would not want to bring up is the fact that a lot of King's conflict internally around support for Israel or lack thereof was the result was a culmination of his increasing radicalism that was sort of signified in the famous or infamous, from the perspective of the state, 1967 Riverside Church speech, A Time to Break.
Again, we went over that in the Ali Salam article, right? That doesn't matter. So here's what Fishback says. King Cuck, Martin Luther Cuck, was clearly conflicted about West Asia and concerned about his image as an internationally known peacemaker. During that same June 8th, 1967 conference, King sought out advice from young Levison and Harry Wachtel what to say about regarding West Asia. He believed that if pressed to speak out, he could just emphasize his overall philosophy that war does not solve social and political problems. So, MLK, again, if he's consulting with Zionist Jews, he is a Zionist cuck.
Violence.
Again, Jared Ball loves whitewashing Martin Luther Cuck. Jared Ball loves whitewashing Martin Luther Cuck. Why? Well, Jared Ball's maternal grandparents were Zionist squatters from Russia. They were Russian Jews, and they lived on a kibbutz in Palestine. And he made excuses for them.
where he condemns the U.S. war in Vietnam. He condemns colonial imposition of all kinds, and is seen increasingly as a threat to national security by the state. But this also begins to inform how King looks at the state of Israel. Now, this is one part of the chapter that really struck my interest because of my ever-increasing focus and critique of black capitalism and its messaging. And I thought this was very...
So, this is what Small Hat Michael Fishback writes. Whatever you may have thought about the intricacies of the genocide of Palestine, King clearly believed the Zionist entity had a right to exist as a state, and he had no qualms about affirming this point. Again, Martin Luther Cuck was a Zionist cuck. Martin Luther Cuck was a liberal Protestant Zionist cuck. And Jared Ball loves making excuses for Martin Luther Cuck.
Interesting, because King's strategy to try to walk that tightrope, as this chapter is describing, was to defend Israel's right to exist, but condemn the economic oppression that it imposed on the Palestinian and Arab community. As the chapter says here, King therefore chose to balance his public assertion of Israel's right to exist with an indirect acknowledgement of the Arab point of view, but in economic, not political terms.
So King, Martin Luther Cuck did word salad. King therefore chose to balance his public assertion of the Zionist entity's right to exist with an indirect acknowledgement of the Arab point of view, but in economic, not political terms. He was a Zionist cuck. Again, Jared Ball, the son of a Russian Ashkenazi Jew, and the grandson of Zionist squatters from Russia who lived on a kibbutz in Palestine, seems to like running cover for Martin Luther Cuck. Martin Luther King, Martin Luther Cuck, same shit, right? Martin Luther King was a Zionist cuck.
To speak about how poverty and the lack of economic development in the Arab world kept the pot of violence and war boiling, and eschewed any overt discussion of the political basis of Arab grievances such as Palestinian dispossession, the fate of the 1948 refugees, compensation for their property losses, and so forth. So as I noted when reading this, here King reverses his argument for black people and avoids the reality of political power. This is an acknowledgement that focus on economics, quote-unquote Palestinian capitalism, is a concession to power and is itself not real power at all. Because as I've talked about extensively with King and the claim that King spoke explicitly against concepts of black buying power and black banking and black capitalism, saying that billions of federal investment would need to be required, and political power and redistribution would all be essential if black people were to ever be free or equal, etc. But because he's walking this tightrope, he does what is now done to us today. You can almost get away with couching the problems exclusively along the terms of economics if you're not talking about it in the context of colonialism, capitalism, and exploitation in that way. And you're simply saying if we address their poverty and address some of this gap in inequality, we can lessen the horrors. And in that way, the tightrope we're asked to walk today, and that pundits are inviting us to walk today, is to say, I know black people are suffering, but I'm not going to advocate that they organize for political power. I'm just going to say, get your money right. And that's what King was saying to the Palestinians then. In this case, he was wrong. But
finally, Jared Ball admits Martin Luther Cuck was wrong. Finally. Oh, but he's tightroping. Oh, he's walking the tightrope. That's not an excuse. Zero excuses. Zero excuses. Look, someone has to be the hard ass who's the team captain. Right? Someone has to be the hard ass who's no nonsense and is basically like the team captain. I don't take excuses for the behavior of Zionists, especially Martin Luther Cuck.
I just thought that was wild that he reverses himself when talking about Palestinians, because he knows full well in terms of black people that that's not going to work. But he also knows, and as this chapter points out,
so King therefore chose to balance his public assertion of the Zionist entity's right to exist with an indirect acknowledgement of the Arab point of view, but in economic and not political terms. He chose to speak out about how poverty and the lack of economic opportunity in the Arab world kept the pot of violence and war boiling, and eschewed any overt discussion of the political basis of Arab grievances, Palestinian dispossession, the fate of the 1948 refugees, compensation for property losses, and so forth. This was about as close to expressing overt support for Arab perspectives as King was willing to go publicly. So, again, King was a cuck of the Zionists. And the fact that Jared Ball won't call him a cuck or a Zionist gatekeeper, and in some ways Jared Ball is running cover for Martin Luther Cuck, tells you a lot about Jared Ball. Oh, and Jared Ball's maternal grandparents were Zionist squatters from Russia. Pay me my reparations, Jared Ball.
That the removal of the occupation is not really on the table. So to walk the line while having to say Israel has a right to exist, we just need to lessen the violence and the oppression of Palestinians. He can get away with that, or he hoped he could get away with that.
Notice how he said he could get away with that and then changed to, oh, he hoped he could get away with that. Notice how he said that? Notice how he said that? Bruh, you make a fumble, I'm going to pounce on the fumble, bruh. Easy money. Right? Notice how he said that? He could get away with that. He thought he could get away with it. See what I'm saying? Jared Ball's running cover for him. He's running a Tampa 2 for Martin Luther Cuck here.
But it's insufficient.
And even Jared Ball admits that it's insufficient.
See, because he does say here, and this is something, again, the Amy Schumers of the world won't want to quote. And this is speaking in June of 1967. King says, I think for the ultimate peace and security of the situation, it will probably be necessary for Israel to give up this conquered territory.
Message!
Giving Tuesday.
What the fuck, Jared? I was gonna read the shit on the screen and you had to put message. You fucking weirdo, you.
Because to hold on.
So, but get this. He was pressed, you know what I mean? So it says, when pressed to comment about whether the Zionist entity should return the Arab territories it occupied during the war, King was forced to get off message and go beyond palatable platitudes to answer that specific political question. Still, he chose his words carefully and used qualifying language. I think the ultimate peace and security of the situation, it will probably be necessary for the Zionists to give up this conquered territory, because to hold on to it will only exacerbate the tensions and deepen the bitterness of the Arabs. These were prescient words indeed. I don't know what prescient means. I will look it up though. So he was politically gegenpressed. He was politically blitzed. We ran a strong safety blitz on Martin Luther Cuck. We fucking gegenpressed Martin Luther Cuck. And we made him answer. This is no different to when Rashida Tlaib was caught taking J Street money in 2018, and people such as Steven Saleta, Asser Abu Khalil, and Ali Abu Nima, and myself pressed Rashida Tlaib about it and forced her to give back the J Street money. We had to press them, right? Let's see if Jared Ball talks about that.
To it will only exacerbate the tensions and deepen the bitterness of the Arabs. These were prescient words indeed. And it's interesting, this chapter is pointing out that part was a comment that came when he was, quote, pressed to comment about whether Israel should return the Arab territories it occupied during the war. King was forced to get off message and go beyond the palatable platitudes to answer that specific political question. And again, I love the way it's written, that this is the political question that King wanted to avoid. But when pressed, he said, unlike what A.B. Schumer and others would often want to quote and would be left out.
Why? Because pressuring politicians is like blitzing a quarterback, right? We know my uncle was the king of corner blitzes, right? We know my uncle was the king of corner blitzes back in the day at Service High. So I know a lot about blitzing, right? I know quite a bit about blitzing, right? Pressuring politicians and leaders, in this case, Martin Luther Cuck, right? It's like blitzing the quarterback. You put enough pressure on them, you'll cause them to throw an interception. You'll cause them to fumble. This is no different. When you put enough pressure on them, they'll have to answer the hard questions. Easy for us, for those that are applying pressure.
Of the video clips, etc., that would be circulated by pro-Israel Zionists, etc., and so forth, is that King said you probably have to give up the conquered territory if you want to stop the violence. That's the political question. You can't just encourage some reduction in the gap of material inequality or income or wealth. You can't just tell Palestinians to circulate their dollar or to start a business. That's not going to work. That's not the issue. You have to come up off that territory.
So here's what's also interesting. King was also worried that the recent war would derail the peace movement that was trying to organize additional and large national protests against the Vietnam War. Again, he is anti-liberation. King was a Zionist cuck. MLK was a Zionist cuck. Even before the war broke out, his aides believed that the peace movement was suffering badly because Jews who were highly represented within its ranks had all become hawks when it came to events in the Middle East. See? I told you MLK was a Zionist cuck.
But as the chapter goes on, it really does make clear that King never really elevated politically to the level of those on his left, namely Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael. He doesn't. He comes into conflict with the.
So notice that King is actively communicating with Zionist criminals. Public perceptions about King's stance towards the genocide of Palestine continued to trouble him thereafter. 6 days after writing to El Al Airlines, Zionist squatters, King felt compelled to write another letter dealing with the Zionist entity. In mid-August, the SNCC newsletter controversy erupted. I told you so. I told you MLK was a Zionist cuck. 2 weeks later, the National Conference for New Politics in Chicago had adopted the statement condemning the Zionist entity for starting the June War and Zionism. They condemned Zionism as well, obviously, because the Zionist entity is Zionist. This time it was harder for King to sidestep the issue, given that he had opened the conference with the keynote speech. Several American Jewish organizations, among them the American Jewish Committee, who funded Martin Luther Cuck, the American Jewish Congress, and the National Jewish Community Relations Advisory Council, and it looks like the Union of American Hebrew Congregations and the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations of America, and the Anti-Defamation League.
There's the SNCC newsletter controversy, which was ultimately condemning Israel and Zionism as racism and colonialism. And all these Jewish groups funded Martin Luther Cuck. And siding with the Palestinians and recognizing.
Let's see if we can get a better view of. Several major American Jewish organizations, among them the American Jewish Committee, who funded Martin Luther Cuck, the American Jewish Congress, the National Jewish Community Relations Advisory Council, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations of America, the United Synagogues of America, the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, who Diallo Kenyatta used to work for and has admitted on camera working for them, sent King a telegram shortly after the conference ended asking him that he publicly distance himself from the gathering because of the statement on the Zionist entity. The telegram argued because King had opened up the conference with a speech, he might be perceived as endorsing its subsequent resolutions.
Himself from the rest of them, had spoken at the beginning of that conference, didn't apparently realize how radical it was going to end up being, and then was called to condemn them and to separate himself from the rest of them, distance himself from the gathering because of the statement on Israel. again, as being Zionist and colonialist. Richard Russell, a Jewish businessman, activist, and part owner of Ramparts magazine. Russell was close to King and occupied a seat of the executive board of the National Conference for New Politics. He indicated that he was resigning from the committee because he had tried and failed to have a fellow board member, Stokely Carmichael, removed. King adopted this suggestion, one coming from Stanley Levinson, his
ghostwriter,
and sometimes co-author. King adopted
his fucking ghostwriter, because MLK was a puppet, a Zionist puppet.
This suggestion almost verbatim, that is the suggestion that he say that Israel's right to exist as a state and its security is incontestable. So King did reconfirm that Israel has a right to exist. And what is described here is his two-pronged approach, trying to balance support for Israel with a recognition that the roots of the problem lay in the region's economic underdevelopment. That was the hustle, as I'm calling it. But again, it's a lot more nuanced than Amy Schumer would want to say, and of course, and other.
No, you're just afraid to call King a Zionist cuck because your grandparents were Zionist squatters.
And all of them leave out King's increasing radicalism elsewhere, but on this.
But he was increasing in radicalism elsewhere. I don't give a fuck. Martin Luther Cuck was a Zionist cuck.
This issue, he had not been given the chance to properly evolve politically, I would argue. It's clear.
Oh, he didn't give him the chance to evolve politically. Shut up, Jared. Your grandparents were Zionist squatters from Russia.
Clear to me where he was headed, but you can see the forces aligned to inhibit it. So King did, that is, offer up a statement on behalf of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, stating that Israel's right to exist as a state and security is incontestable. At the same time, the great powers have the obligation to recognize the Arab world is in a state of imposed poverty and backwardness, and that this must threaten peace.
The fact that the Islamophobe known as Martin Luther Cuck was calling Arabs poor and backwards, I want to see if Jared Ball's going to call that out. If he's going to call out King's Islamophobia.
So the chapter talks a little bit about this being part of Andy Young's plan as well, to as a statesman, to again avoid the political, make note of the reality of the imposed poverty, but
again, Jared Ball unwilling to call out Islamophobia. Again, this is a guy that likes John Henrik Clark, who is an Islamophobe.
If you're not demanding Israel give up territory, or if you're not demanding or challenging Israel's right to exist, or not challenging its occupation or settler colonial status, there is no upending the imposed poverty. So this is just
at least Jared Clark, or not Jared Clark, at least Jared Ball is calling out King for being to a certain extent, he's not lambasting him. Again, Jared Ball is an academic who is the grandson of Zionist squatters from Russia. Like, he is not a revolutionary. So he's not calling out Martin Luther Cuck hard enough. He's not calling him a Zionist cuck and a Protestant Freemason.
A shortcoming in King's approach, but as the chapter does say here, rather than simply blaming each side, especially the Arabs, for intransigence or fanaticism, the statement instead offered a left-wing sounding economic analysis by noting that at the heart of the problem are oil interests. The SCLC statement condemned anti-Semitism firmly and clearly. SCLC will continue tirelessly to condemn racism, whether its form is white supremacy or anti-Semitism. King knew the issue was going to get worse. He noted that Israel's use of military power to subdue the Arabs was no solution, a point Amy Schumer and others would leave out. So again, even if you want to quote him as supporting the existence of Israel and condemning anti-Semitism, he was also condemning the violent oppression and imposed poverty of Palestinians. But he did separate himself from Black Power advocates. He did separate himself, and according to this, took...
MLK was a Zionist cuck, okay, Jared? You just gotta call it like it is. I know your grandparents on your maternal side were Zionist squatters in Palestine from Russia, but that's not an excuse. You gotta call out Martin Luther Cuck for being a Zionist.
Swipes at Black nationalists and their vision of racial solidarity with the Third World. by stating that such people were color consumed and see a kind of mystique in being colored. But he did acknowledge the plight of the Arab community and sought to have them...
So in other words, Martin Luther Cuck was a liberal Zionist like Bernie Sanders. Martin Luther Cuck was a liberal Zionist like Bernie Sanders. Quit motherfucking putting him on a pedestal. He should not be put on a pedestal because he was a liberal Zionist cuck. Quit running cover for him.
Brought into the conversation where he would end up saying peace for Israel means security. On the other hand, we must see that peace for Arabs means in a real sense of security on another level. Peace for the Arabs means the kind of economic security that they do so desperately need. These nations, as you know, are part of that third world of hunger, disease, of illiteracy. I think that as long as these conditions exist, there will be tensions, there will be endless quests to find scapegoats. 10 days later, King was dead. So there you have it. Definitely don't want to stop there. Please definitely check out the book and that chapter in particular. And I just wanted to point out very, in as short a way as possible, that obviously when it comes to Dr. King, much of the context and nuance is left out.
Context and nuance? Dude, the dude was a liberal Zionist. Martin Luther Cuck was a liberal Zionist. Quit running cover. Oh, context and nuance. Fuck you. Martin Luther Cuck was a liberal Zionist.
Many people, particularly these times, and with these issues being the subject, are not interested in the context or the nuance, particularly as it comes to Black and Palestinian people, and are just looking to make largely abusive use of those histories. So wherever King's shortcomings were politically, he was at least much more left and...
No, he was not left. Martin Luther King was not left-wing. He was a Zionist cuck. You cannot be a Zionist cuck and call yourself left-wing, Jared. I know your grandparents were Zionist squatters in Palestine, but that's not an excuse to run cover for Martin Luther Cuck, who was a Zionist cuck and a Protestant Freemason.
Critically engaged, and he's given credit for, certainly by the Amy Schumer types. So just wanted to point that out very quickly and encourage people to check it out for themselves and continue the conversation beyond here, obviously. And then finally, whatever King's or anyone else's shortcomings are, we don't have to be stuck there. And
we shouldn't put Martin Luther Cuck on a pedestal. He's actually the last person in terms of Palestine that we should put on a pedestal. Oh, but again, your grandparents were Zionist squatters from Russia who lived on a kibbutz.
Have to be stopped at that point. We can move farther to the left and continue to evolve our radical critiques, analyses, and militancy.
Like I said, I'm more radical and revolutionary than Jared Ball is, and I can confirm that.
To the point where we're freeing Palestine, freeing the land, freeing all political prisoners.
And I'm more likely to free Palestine than you are. Why? Your grandparents were Zionist squatters from Russia who lived on a kibbutz.
Finding peace, as Fred Hampton used to say, even if we have to fight for it. So peace.
And I'm good at fighting for it. So, again, I'm the guy that kicked Young Life out of the Anchorage School District. I'm the guy that exposed Debbie Miller as a racist. I exposed Sue Moore of Howling Wolf Furs as a neo-Confederate. Bro, I'm a lot more revolutionary than you are, Jared. You're an academic. You're an academic, and you're the grandson of Zionist squatters from Russia who lived on a kibbutz. My family, my ancestors smashed the Crusaders. My 47th great-grandpa brought Islam to Spain from Palestine. On my dad's side, I'm descended, if not directly, from Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub. I'm descended from one of his associates or relatives. I'm also descended from Yemeni merchant Hashem al-Bulatiya, who had close ties, who was a close Umayyad ally down there in Dhamar, and also had roots in Makala City. Again, I'm way more revolutionary than you, Jared. So quit running cover for Martin Luther Cuck. Quit running cover, dude. Quit running cover. So, and sometimes you don't give people time to evolve politically. Sometimes you gegenpress them. Sometimes you cornerback blitz them. And again, my uncle is the king. In the 70s, my uncle was the king of the cornerback blitz. in the Cook Inlet Conference. So I know a lot about cornerback blitzes. MLK had to be pressured into at least acknowledging what Palestinians were going through. He had to be fucking pressured, dude. Martin Luther King, again, he was a Zionist cuck. We should not be putting him on a pedestal. We should not be celebrating Martin Luther King Day. But again, Jared Ball loves running cover for Zionist grifters. Because guess what? Jared Ball's maternal grandparents were Zionist squatters who lived on a kibbutz. So there you go. And they were from Russia.
Peace, everybody. Catch you next time here. That makes what I like and throughout the Black Pound.
He mixes what he likes. Yeah, right. But he does like to run cover for Martin Luther Cuck. So there you go. And why is that? His maternal grandparents were Zionist squatters from Russia.